speaker is coming from the University of Århusin. Professor Wolfgang Kleinwächter is going to talk about policies, principles and frameworks, and he poses the quite provocating question of do we need a universal constitution for the global internet? Please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning everybody. I think I will sit because I had just a knee operation and for me it's more comfortable to sit. And I have also some slides.
You're using your own computer?
No, it's here.
Yeah, if it's here, that's fine.
What's the name of this file?
It's Helsinki Wolfgang. Helsinki Wolfgang.
So you can use the desk behind that. So
Yeah, yeah.
Helsinki IT. Yeah.
Okay. Then I can use this here. Yeah, thanks, Ilya. Thanks for the Madam Minister. I'm very happy to begin in Helsinki. I remember that was the first Finnish Internet Governance Forum. I was already here, so that means I feel like home in this nice city in the beginning of a nice spring. And it's remarkable to see, how this idea to have such a multi-stakeholder platform, which came out from the World Summit on the Information Society in the year 2005, has mushroomed now all over the place. I came yesterday night from Geneva from the 20th anniversary of ISOC, and there was also a presentation on national IGFs, and there are around now 50 or 60 national IGFs and nearly 10 regional or sub-regional internet governance forums. So obviously this was the right idea at the right moment to create something new, to discuss this very complex internet issues in a way which goes beyond traditional policy making, which is normally done within a parliament or within body of the government or the elected body as we have in our various institutions in a representative democracy. That's why, I have also this a little bit provocative title next to the title which was announced in the program. That means in the year 2012, do we see now a clash of cultures, or are we able to move towards a constructive cohabitation? The question which is behind this is, obviously we need something like a regulatory framework, like principles or rules. Everybody agrees that the internet is not a law-free zone, and there is the need to have some guidelines or orientation or whatever. The point in question is, how you move towards such type of guidelines, how you create what some people have called a global constitution for the internet. And here comes the clash of cultures. Will it be done in the traditional way that you have assembly then which works on a constitution and then it's adopted by governments, as the United Nations Charter of the United Nations in 1945 was produced, or the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948. These were remarkable documents negotiated by governments after consultations with a lot of people. Is this the way, how we should create a framework for the internet, or has the world changed and are we now confronted, with new forms, new political cultures? And indeed, if you go a little bit deeper into the ecosystem, then you see a number of, I'd say, important differences between the world how we know it from the last 50 years and the world of the 21st century. Normally, in a country you have always, at the end of the day, a central authority, a decision-making body, or an executive body, which is responsible for, let's say, the whole country. It's the government, it's the parliament, and this is what we know. But the internet has no central authority. There are numerous different institutions, primarily private organizations, who are dealing with parts of the internet. Even if ICANN sometimes is labeled as the world government of the internet, this is not true. ICANN manage just a small part of the internet, in particular the domain name system, and to be frank, in particular the generic domain name space, because the country code top-level domains are managed by the national registries and they're operating under national law. Although ICANN coordinates the IP address space, but the IP address management is done by 5 different regional internet registries. They just get the addresses from IANA, which is another organization which works together with ICANN and hands out the address pools. So that means 2 key resources for the internet are managed by a broad range of different organizations. Also the standards and the protocols which enable the communication are made by an organization called the IETF, which operates the Internet Engineering Task Force, and the World Wide Web Consortium. The IETF operates in close cooperation with ISOC, which is also a private body, which is an own structure where the private sector and technical people have a say. Then we have the Internet Architecture Board, the IEEE, which brings together the engineers from the electronic and electric field. So that means there are numerous non-governmental organizations which, quote unquote, govern the internet. And on the other hand, you have the traditional intergovernmental organizations which now have discovered that the internet is also an important thing and they should have it on the agenda. It's the ITU, which deals with telecommunication. It's WIPO, which deals with intellectual property rights. It's the World Trade Organization, which deals with trade in services. It's UNESCO, which deals with cultural issues. And the United Nations itself, which has security policy issue on the agenda. So, and if you compare these 2 different set of organizations, then you will see, indeed, they operate in a totally different way. While in this non-governmental private organization, you have a governance model which is a policy development process based very often of requests for proposals or requests for projects, and then you have a bottom-up, open, transparent discussion process which then leads in a certain moment to the establishment of a working group, and when the working group has reached a certain level of consensus, it's called a rough consensus, then it's adopted like a law. So this is a bottom-up, transparent, open process. While in intergovernmental organizations, like very often in national parliaments, you have a top-down process where deals are made among various parties and you reach a decision with 51%. Very often it's enough to have 50.1% here to reach a decision, and this is done very often behind closed doors, you know, in dealing between, you know, if I get something from you, then you will get something from me, and all this what we know from diplomatic negotiations as well as from negotiations in our parliaments. So I think these are 2 different cultures which now coming together. They lived together in the last 20, 30 years without any problems, because the internet has not yet reached the level what we have now, that the internet penetrates all areas of life. And now all these traditional political bodies have to deal with the internet issues, but they are in conflict now with the already established policy procedures for these organizations, because it will be difficult if government agency will overtake all this technical work which is done by the IETF, by ICANN, the IAB, World Wide Web Consortium, or others. So this is obviously a problem that you have 2 different legal organizations now which have a certain responsibility for the management of the internet as a whole. But the only way to do this is probably this new governance model which is emerging more and more, and this is the multi-stakeholder governance model. The multi-stakeholder governance model goes back to a definition which was adopted by the United Nations World Summit on the Information Society in the year 2005. And the proposal, the language, which was adopted by the heads of state, so that means it's a document which has a certain governmental support, was the result of a working group which was established by Kofi Annan, the Secretary General of the United Nations, because in the first World Summit, China and the United States of America couldn't agree what internet governance is, and always, if you have no clue what an issue is, then you create a working group. And so Kofi Annan was asked to establish the working group, and then the working group proposed a definition what internet governance is. And this definition looks rather simple. It's not spectacular, but it has at least two spectacular elements in it if you read it word by word. So it says internet governance is the development and application by governments, the private sector and civil society in their respective roles of shared principle, norms, rules, decision-making procedures and programs that shape the evolution and the use of the internet. So, nothing spectacular. But there are two elements in it which are really remarkable. The first thing is that it puts as, key players three different organizations, more or less on the same level, governments, private sector and civil society, by adding in their respective roles. That means all of the three main stakeholders have to play a role in internet governance, but this is a special role, so they cannot substitute each other. You cannot have, leadership is alone with the governments. So this is certainly, the governments have to play a role, but it's not the only band in town. So although private sector leadership, only private sector makes all the decisions. This is also wrong, because this was the original conflict. The Americans wanted to have private sector leadership, and China wanted to have governmental leadership in managing the internet. So, and what the working group on internet governance came the result was, there is no need for a leader in internet. We do not need leadership. We need a collaboration of the various involved parties. They have to collaborate, to coordinate, to communicate to each other, to find issue by issue the relevant solution for these complex problems. So this is the basic philosophy, that there is no single leadership, there is no traditional hierarchy, as we know from the political processes. There is a network model, and you have to go issue by issue to find the solution according to the specific environment, the specific needs, in a bottom-up, transparent policy development process where all stakeholders are involved in their specific roles. So once again, that does not mean that one stakeholder can substitute the other or has a certain leadership. Certainly, specific role means in a certain arena, one stakeholder has more experience than the other. And certainly you have to have somebody who leads it in a certain way. And if it comes to decision making, you have to have a decision making body. But with this flexible definition, it could be that in the fight against cybercrime, probably the governments have a natural leadership. But the governments need also, in the fight against cybercrime, law enforcement needs the private sector. They need probably civil society for crime prevention, for education. So that means if you want efficiently fight against cybercrime as a government, it cannot be done today anymore just on your own feet. That means you have to have a close collaboration with the other stakeholders. In the domain name system, probably, there is no need that governments take a lead. They should have a say in it. And in the Governmental Advisory Committee of ICANN, they have a channel that they can give advice to the ICANN board. Domain names should be managed by the private sector, so they have the leadership. So it means issue by issue creates another governance model, another triangle, how you deal most efficiently with this concrete issue. This is the first part of the definition, and this is an interesting new element in policy making on the global level. The second part is also interesting, because the keyword here is shared. Shared principle, norms, rule, decision making procedures and programs. And I think this is, has still to be investigated. What does it mean? Sharing decision-making capacities. So normally we see policy development is the first step, and then after you have developed a policy, you have to have a decision-making procedure in place. So, and this has to be done in collaboration, as it's outlined in the first part of the definition. That means policy development, you have to listen to all parties, so you have to have a platform where the various groups who are involved, who are affected by a policy, have a channel to express their special views, their special dimensions. So, but this has to come together and then has to grow to a certain moment where you have to make a decision. So, but here comes now, even decision making should be shared among the stakeholders. I think this is not yet really tested out. So we have some examples where now we try to share decision making, and a little bit later I come to ICANN and say, how complicated this is. But normally it's so that decision making is in the hand of the person, the party, the institution which has the power. Decision making means the power to make the decision. So, and how this can be shared, this is really a complicated issue because it's part of the power structure within a country or on the whole globe. So I think everybody would agree from a theoretical level that the internet has triggered a power shift. So power is now floating around, it's redistributed. So, but a redistribution of power always leads to a power struggle, and we are within this power struggle now, and it's still unclear, how the power is redistributed among the various groups. Who has what part of the decision-making capacity, the power to make decisions at the end of the day, for which issue? So I think this is where we are at the moment, that we recognize power is shifting, so something is going on, so traditional power execution doesn't work anymore. You see that in many, many countries. And a good example is also Germany, which was sleeping for many, many years with the internet, but now it's waking up, and suddenly, a party, a political party, which more or less is not a classical, has no classical tradition in Germany, appeared, the pirates, and take away 10% of the voters in all predictions, and this could have tremendous influence of the distribution of power in the next parliamentary election. So still high level of confusion, nobody knows what will be the real consequences and how this will influence the future of the political system. But this signals only, that what we are talking here about internet governance goes far beyond managing of a technical resource. So it has influence, it influences the whole society. And insofar, this definition, which was adopted by the heads of state for more than 115 countries in Tunis in 2005, is a good guideline. It does not answer all questions, but it gives you an imagination, what a new governance model in the 21st century, how this could look like. And the two key elements here are that you have to involve all stakeholders in their respective role. No stakeholder should have a blanco check for leadership, and no stakeholder can be substituted by another stakeholder. And on the other hand, you have to develop procedures, programs, principles and norms, and even decision-making procedures which can be shared by various parties. The way how this sharing takes place is a different issue. We have meanwhile already 2 or 3 models where this new multi-stakeholder governance principles, I would say, explored, or I trying to find out how this could be done. So the most known example is certainly ICANN. ICANN was established in 1998 as a result of a 10-year discussion within the United States what should be, how the domain name system should be future managed. There were several proposals in the 90s, and then President Clinton and Al Gore signed a document which say, okay, the domain name system should be managed by a private corporation headquartered in the United States under Californian law, but an international body. So, and the result was the establishment of ICANN. ICANN stands for the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. And a number of the principles which I have mentioned earlier, bottom-up, open, transparent policy development, is what ICANN is. So ICANN is a mixture of various groups. There's a number of supporting organizations for your generic top-level domains, for country code top-level domains, for IP addresses, for protocols and codes. It has governments involved, it has the internet users involved in form of advisory committees, it has security experts involved in the Stability and Security Advisory Group, there's a technical liaison group, there are around 15, 20 sub-bodies within ICANN, and all these bodies, cooperating in a certain way, coordinated by a board of directors of 16 people who can decide, and the 16 people are, also coming, from various sources. There is a nomination committee which sends 8 people to the board, and then there are various constituencies which can send 8 other people to the board. So that means it's very difficult, to occupy the board as a whole, because it's based also on rotation. You cannot serve more than 2 times in the board. It's for 3 years. So it's a rather complicated process, and I myself was chairing the nomination committee of ICANN, and Ilya Letzipovo is now a member of the nomination committee. It's interesting to see how this, let's say, inner democracy of ICANN works via such rather new procedures if you compare it with traditional policy processes. So that means ICANN is an interesting body where you have already this, new forms of collaboration among stakeholders and procedures for where you have to share policy development and decision making. So one of the key questions is, what is the role of governments? Because this is now, it's a point where you have growing frictions. Because a lot of governments are not happy that they just have an advisory role to a corporation which is headquartered in the United States as a private corporation, operating under Californian law. Because normally governments do not give advice to a private corporation. Governments take advice from non-governmental stakeholders, and then governments make a decision. So, but within ICANN, governments have no decision-making capacity. And while this is more or less understandable, because it's a very technical issue and it's not, primarily a public policy issue, in the meantime, more and more it became clear that you cannot separate in this classical way technical issues from political issues. So that means the public policy elements are incorporated, you could say, in technical decisions. So that you cannot say here, we decided technology, this is part of ICANN, and then the public policy, this is part of the governments. So the devil is in the detail. So, and a good example was the discussion about the XXX domain, which was originally adopted by the ICANN board in the first phase, and then when they saw the proposal, it was rejected. And then the ICM registry, which wanted to have the XXX domain, went to a court, and the court decided, no, ICANN was wrong with this decision, and the ICM registry has a right to get it, and the governments were not happy with it, because nobody really said, okay, we are in favor of a XXX domain in the internet as a new top-level domain. There was not really a protest, but a lot of governments said, this is not what we want to have. And even in the United States, a lot of people in the Midwest wrote letters to the US Congress and saying, what's going on the internet? They open a new top-level domain, XXX. It shouldn't happen. And the US Congress then approached the US Department of Commerce and saying, what ICANN is doing, they operated a collaborative agreement with the Department of Commerce, and they want to introduce XXX. So, but there was a procedure within ICANN, and went through all the committees and the supporting organizations, and there are pro and cons. So, because some people said, I myself, had a discussion with the guy from Iran, the governmental representative from Iran, and he was very against it and said, now XXX opens the internet for pornographic content. And my answer was, it is already there. The good thing with XXX is then you have to control only one top-level domain and remove it, because we are moving from straight prostitution to a red light district, which can be better controlled. That means it should be in the interest of Iran or of Saudi Arabia, to have all this content in one top-level domain, which can then be easier managed. So this was the reason why the adult industry itself was also against it, because they said, okay, this is if we have all the adult content in one top-level domain, then this can be easier controlled. You know, when the decision was made in San Francisco, there were the whole adult industry from San Fernando Valley. They came to San Francisco and protest against XXX, so that it was not the wish from this industry. But finally, the board made a decision, you know, with, I think it was 11-4 in favor of XXX. And that what happened then? Nelly Cruz, the commissioner from the European Union, wrote a letter to Larry Strickling, the Deputy Secretary of Commerce in the United States government, and said, you know, Mr. Strickling, can you stop this? The European Commission do not want to have XXX in the domain name system. So, theoretically, the US government can stop this because the US government has still the function, according to the Memorandum of Understanding, or now it's called the Affirmation of Commitment with the US government, von ICANN. They have to authorize the publication of a sole file for a top-level domain in the root. That means if ICANN adopts a top-level domain, then what is right of the dot goes into the root server, but before it goes into the root server, which is managed by VeriSign, it needs the authorization, and the authorization is done by the US government, by the NTIA. So that means this was the moment of truth, whether the US government would intervene and would stop it, because also the US government did not like XXX. So, but then what happened? NTIA, you know, I told to the lady who did this, she said, we closed our eyes and signed it, and we sent it to VeriSign. Because the argument of Mr. Strickling was in a letter back to Madame Cruz, and then they had a meeting in May in Brussels, and he tried to explain it to her, is if we want to have a multi-stakeholder model, and we have a new decision-making procedure, then at the end of the day we have to live also with decision we do not like. Otherwise we go back to the system where governments dictate what the others have to do. If we would have done this, then we would have got immediately a big applause from China and from other countries who say, okay, we want to have governmental leadership for the internet. So that means, and it would have been very confusing if we say, yeah, as a government finally we decide, but we do not want to have governmental leadership with China together. So that means either you are for the multi-stakeholder model, then you have to live with decisions you do not like as a government, because as long as the policy development process is open, transparent, all parties are involved, and or you go back to the governmental model, to the traditional culture. And in so far you see indeed here a clash of different cultures. So should it be done in this open and transparent bottom-up way where all stakeholders are involved, and sometimes decisions appear which are not so great. I think it's really, unfortunately, you know, this XXX example is not the best example, but to explain the procedure. But you know, it shows a lot about the nature of the multi-stakeholder process compared with the traditional intergovernmental or governmental processes. And insofar, you know, this remains to be seen how this will be further advanced. You know, at the moment, the other conflict is the introduction of not only one new top-level domain, but of about 2,000 new generic top-level domains. So ICANN has started the process, also, you know, with a lot of skepticism articulated by governments, and now we are in a phase, a rather critical phase, that you know, we will see probably the largest revolution in the internet since the introduction of the World Wide Web. That you will have thousands of these new generic top-level domains for anything, you know, .shop, .music, .kino, .miami, .helsinki, whatever, you know, you can, there is no technical limitation for the 280 top-level domains, country and generic top-level domains we have at the moment. So technology offers you, you know, thousands more opportunities. If a server from VeriSign can manage 100 million domain names on the secondary level. So the question is, why not a root server should be also able to manage at least 10,000 files. So it's a question of routing and, you know, some technical issues are there, but all the tests which has been made in the last 10 years say, okay, there is no real technical barrier against the introduction of 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 new top-level domains. But for governments, this is also a problem, whether they should be in favor or not, and a lot of other issues are involved. If people apply for names of cities, of regions, of other names which have a certain meaning in a country. Trademark owners are also concerned because they fear that their trademarks are stolen, and then they have a battle, to get all the trademarks back. And so the IOC and the Red Cross, wants to reserve all references to names like Olympia or Olympic in the domain name system that can be managed only by the IOC. But then you have a problem, what then the Greek airline or Olympic Airways is doing if the word Olympic is owned by a rich organization headquartered in Lausanne. What about the city Olympia? What about the many restaurants which have the name Olympia? So are they not allowed anymore, to apply under their name? Or so that means it gets an incredible big problem, and it has to be seen, how this will be managed. So, and now the question is, who should make the final decisions? So, and my observation from the debate in the joint meetings between the ICANN board and the Governmental Advisory Committee tell me, this is not yet finished, and you have a struggle. Who has the right of the last word? So that means, at least in the ICANN context now, people accept that the multi-stakeholder model is the only way to move forward. So that means the various stakeholders have to play a certain role. But it's still unclear, how the decision-making procedure is organized in the very final end. So that means who has really the authority or the right of the last word. And this is an interesting process, and the only way forward is to come with more procedures. At the moment, the procedures for interaction between the Governmental Advisory Committee and ICANN are rather vague. So there is a procedure if the Governmental Advisory Committee gives advice to the board has to discuss it, and if it accepts, it's okay. If the board rejects the advice from the governments, then the governments can ask for consultations, and the ICANN board has to explain to the public why it has rejected the advice from the governments. And if the consultations fail, then the governments reserve their right to act independently, and ICANN is obliged to explain to the public why the consultation has failed. So, but this is still a rather vague procedure. It has not yet really fully tested, because we had not yet such a case where you have real conflict between governments and the ICANN board. But it would be not a surprise that we are moving into a situation where we have this conflict. And there are a lot of other proposals in the background, and this will be in the second part of my presentation, where already other governments are working on alternatives. So the other model we have, it's a little bit different. It's the Internet Governance Forum, and you as a Finnish Internet Governance Forum are meanwhile, part of this or result of this process. So the question in the World Summit was, okay, do we need a new intergovernmental organization for the Internet? An Internet United Nations like the ITU or WIPO, or should it be done by an existing intergovernmental organizations like the ITU? And the answer was no, there is no need for a new bureaucracy, but we need more discussion. And discussion has to involve not only the stakeholders, but also the other stakeholders. And so the compromise was then to create such a discussion platform, which was called the Forum, the Internet Governance Forum, to give this forum a certain authority. So it was that the best is if it's convened by the Secretary General of the United Nations, because then it has the authority of the United Nations, but it should not be led by the government. So the governments play a certain role. It's a little bit different. ICANN is a private corporation with governments in an advisory capacity. So the idea here was not to create a governmental organization with non-governmental organizations in an advisory capacity. The idea was to create a platform where the partners work together in their specific roles on an equal footing, without any leadership. So, but the authority, the legitimacy, came from the Secretary General of the United Nations. And so, and the body, you know, which manages the Internet Governance Forum is the so-called MAC, the Multi-Stakeholder Advisory Group. And this is a group which is also appointed by the Secretary General of the United Nations, but has representatives from all stakeholder groups. So that means you have technical people there, civil society people, governmental people, and then people from the private sector. So this has worked quite well. Surprisingly well. There was a lot of skepticism in the beginning in 2006 when the first IGF took place in Greece, but year for year, you know, it was better and better. So there was, the second was in Rio de Janeiro, then in Hyderabad, in Sharm el-Sheikh, in Vilnius, last year in Nairobi, and the seventh IGF takes place now in Baku, and it's growing, growing, growing. In Nairobi there are about 2,500 people, and also the level is growing. There are a lot of ministers, parliamentarians, CEOs from the big internet companies, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, Cisco. So this is the meeting place where also all, you know, the internet leaders of the world are coming together. The weak point, which was raised again and again by a number of countries, in particular governments, saying, you know, this is just a talking shop. It has no decision-making capacity, and people sitting, talking 4 days in a nice environment and disappearing and nothing comes out from it. So that's why, you know, the General Assembly, which is more or less still responsible for the IGF, started a debate, you know, what could be done in the future with the IGF, because the IGF was established for 5 years only by the World Summit and needed a renewal for its mandate. And when this was debated in the year 2010 in the General Assembly, so there was more or less a consensus that said, okay, we should continue with the IGF, but we have to improve it. So, and while it was easy to reach consensus about what continuation means, 5 more years until the year 2015, there was no consensus what improvement means. So some people had the idea improvement means we move now from a discussion platform to a decision-making platform. That means we create an intergovernmental body. And the other said, no, for us improvement is we develop further the multi-stakeholder discussion model by including some procedures, and so that we have new types of outcome, not in form of legally binding recommendations or conventions, but with messages or, you know, other forms of outcome which gives guidelines, but in a new way, which is not the traditional way how an intergovernmental body is working. So, and because they could not agree what improvement is, they established another working group for IGF improvement, which is managed by the CSDD, which is a sub-body of the ECOSOC. The ECOSOC is between the General Assembly and various other organizations, and the Commission for Science and Technology Development got the mandate, you know, to do the day-to-day management for the IGF. So, and this working group has had a mandate for 2 years, and reports back now to the next CSDD meeting, which is next week, next month in May in Geneva. And the main result from this improvement working group is continue with this multi-stakeholder model. So this has worked. We can do a lot of things more. We can try to, you know, be more concrete with the outcome. So there should be real messages out from the various discussions, and not just, you know, proceedings or summary from the proceedings. There should be a more stable secretariat. There should be better organized structures like the multi-stakeholder advisory group. So there should be a better financial basis for the IGF. So that means step by step the IGF, and Schenkenthal would be more concrete when he speaks this afternoon. This IGF gets more stable, but not in a way that you move now from the discussion platform to a new intergovernmental structure, but, you know, by really inventing something new which has not yet a clear model. So that means it has to develop its own model. So it has to explore unknown territory, you know, how this could be managed so that the discussion leads indeed then also to results in form of decisions, and decisions made in a way as I have described a little bit earlier. So, and the success of the idea is proved by the mushrooming of all these regional and national IGFs. You have this now, as I said already, in 50 or more countries. You have these national platforms where governments, governmental people talk to technical experts and to private sector and to civil society groups. And this cross-constituency communication where people come out of their silos and talk to their neighbors about issues of common interest, because all internet issues are very complex issues. I think this is a very interesting signal and a good sign, and it's the only way forward. So, but the complexity is really here now in the year 2012, and what we see on the other side, on the intergovernmental side, is that more and more governments are now concerned with the internet. It's a question of crime, of security, of economy, and all this. For the first time, the G8 last year in Deauville included the internet into their proceedings. It was under President Sarkozy. And the Deauville Declaration, document of 15 pages, has 4 pages only for the internet. Interestingly, the G8 leaders supported the multi-stakeholder principle as a basis for a governance model for the internet, which is certainly, from the point of view of supporters of the IGF, a big achievement. It remains to be seen what happened when in Camp David in May. Now the G8 leader comes again together, and the Russian president is then Mr. Putin. Whether he will also be so in favor of the multi-stakeholder principle. So it's an open question. So it means the G8 have now adopted a number of principles, 6 principles as general guidelines. But what does it mean? Is this now a framework for the rest of the world, only for the G8? And you know how deep this will go in the understanding of the participants of the G8. The United Nations, which has more than 190 member states, comes now in the next General Assembly, you know, with a whole bunch of different initiatives which are trying also to create some frameworks or this constitution. I come then at the very end. So in the first committee, which deals with disarmament and security questions, the members of the Shanghai Group, in particular Russia and China, has proposed that the General Assembly should adopt a code of conduct which would regulate the behavior of governments in the internet. And the Russians additionally have proposed a new international convention on cybersecurity. If you read the text of the draft convention and the code of conduct, 30 pages, then you think, okay, the basic idea behind this is to renationalize, to re-territorialize the internet, and to bring all the traditional jus cogens principles from the Charter of the United Nations back to the internet, including non-interference into internal affairs, control over content, and all this. So that means to strengthen the sovereignty of the nation state in the internet age. So technically, I think we should be clear about this. Some people say that this is impossible. The internet is borderless, and so the internet is a network of networks. 10,000 networks are linked together. And you can regulate each individual network. You cannot regulate all networks together, but each individual network. Technically, a country like China can certainly regulate its own domain name space under .cn, and they are doing this. So they have even the blessing from the World Summit on the Information Society in Tunis, which says in paragraph 69 that so nobody should interfere into the national domain name space. So that means for the country code, you have the principle of sovereignty. So, but what about all the other domains now with the 2,000 and more new generic top-level domains? So it gets rather complicated, and I don't know, you know, what the intention is by the Russian and the Chinese government when they plan to, what you could call, renationalize or re-territorialize the internet. But this is certainly a strong point, and the arguments they are using in the first committee is security, the risk of cyber war, and you know all these attacks which are going around, and you have to find an answer, you know, how to deal with these security issues, cyber crime, and also, you know, war activities, viruses. Every week we see new things. So it's a complicated problem. The question is a traditional legal instrument negotiated by a committee which has security and disarmament functions. Is this the right way? In the second committee, another group of countries, Brazil, India, and South Africa, are proposing an intergovernmental council for public policy-related issues on the internet called CIRP, Council for Internet-Related Policies, but Intergovernmental Council. And the idea of the Indian proposal is to bring all these non-governmental organizations like ICANN, the IETF, IEEE, World Wide Web Consortium, RIAS, under a governmental oversight body. So that means this intergovernmental UN body would then overtake oversight function over the IETF, ICANN and all this. It would be like a GAC, not as in an advisory capacity, but as a control body over ICANN and to give all these organizations instructions. In the IGF in Nairobi, this was a huge dispute because a guy from the IETF, Patrick Falström, asked the Indian governmental representative, do you want to write code then as governments? You know, who will do the protocols and the code? You know, what is your idea? Do you really believe that you can do it better if you do it as a governmental person? And so it's a little bit of confusion out here. So certainly everybody understands that governments have to play a role, but what is it a master-slave relationship, or are they a part of a process? So, and again here, you see the different cultures. So we are moving from a hierarchy to a network. And the discussion culture, the policy development culture, and also decision-making culture in the network is different than in the hierarchy. In a hierarchy, you have somebody on top who makes a decision, and then everybody has to follow it. So, but I have my doubts whether this would work for a lot of this technical issue in the internet. So this does not exclude governments, but they have to come with their specific contribution. In the new generic top-level domain, it's quite understandable if it comes to names from cities, from regions, or other things which have a certain meaning, a political meaning. But whether this could be done in this way, how the Indian proposed in the United Nations, I have my doubts. Another proposal which was pushed forward by the Swedish government, by Carl Bildt, the foreign minister, and they had just last week a wonderful conference in Stockholm, and Bildt is certainly, you know, one of the big promoter of internet freedom in the world. And, you know, they want to make now the internet a stronger issue in human rights issues. You know, the third committee is responsible for human rights. Sweden has proposed a resolution in the Human Rights Council, which was adopted and supported by around 50 member states. And so that means you will have also the third committee in the General Assembly of the United Nations, an internet debate. So that means you have security, Russia, China, social economy, the second committee, India, Brazil, South Africa, and the third committee, Sweden and like-minded countries. So this could become very interesting what will happen in the United Nations when now this becomes a place, you know, how far this will go. And additionally, the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, plays also a role as a traditional intergovernmental body. ITU was never happy that they could not get the oversight role over the domain name system and IP addresses, because from their understanding is we are doing telecommunication, and you know why we shouldn't do also the internet. But remember in the 80s and 90s, the battle between the netheads and the bellheads, it started in the United States. The internet is different from telecommunication. Telecommunication is organized also like a hierarchy. There's a country code and city codes, the numbering system for the telecom. So this is different. If you cannot mix this together, there's other protocols. So, but from a telecom point of view, in particular from ITU point of view, it would be natural, you know, to get full control over the internet and to manage this in the same way as they manage the telecommunication. Also because the existing telecommunication mechanisms, you know, had an economic dimension which was partly very useful for developing countries, you know, with the sharing of the rates. Now we are, you know, with the internet, more outgoing traffic from third world countries goes to the north, and this changes the economics, and so that means the majority of member states in the ITU are not happy, you know, with this changing economics, you know, from the telecommunication economy to the internet economy, which brings them in a more complicated situation. And so that will be another battlefield, the ITU, because in December this year in Dubai, there is the World Conference on International Telecommunication, which has the mandate to renegotiate a treaty from 1988, the International Regulation of Telecommunication, the ITR regulation. 1988 was just purely telecommunication, and the internet did not play a role. It was already there, but it was not covered by the ITR regulation. So the ITR regulation regulates all kinds of various aspects of telecommunication traffic, roaming, peering, and a lot of other things. So the problem is now, and that's my observation, that the ITU will be wise enough not to attack directly ICANN and to say, you know, we overtake what you are doing with the domain name system and IP addresses. But the ITR regulation have, in Article 2 and 3, they have definitions of around 20 different services, which are in the old version of the 1988 treaty, which are limited to telecommunication. But if you extend the definitions for roaming, peering, IP addresses, spam, and all these categories, which are then outlined in the treaty as such, then the ITU could create, let's say, justification for a new wave of national laws and international agreements by then discovering, based on the definition in the ITR regulations, we have to do something for cybersecurity, for spam, for content control, and for all this. So I think this is a critical moment, how far this so-called renewal of the ITR regulation will go in December in Dubai. So, and then we have also regional organizations which are dealing now as intergovernmental organizations more and more with the internet. A good example is the Oecd. The Oecd was always open to us as stakeholders, and one of the last ministerial conferences in 2008 in Seoul, they established also a new advisory committee for civil society, which was applauded as a big step forward, that the Oecd is open to civil society. And then the US government started in the Oecd initiative to draft principles for internet policy making, also a little bit as an alternative to what is going on in the United Nations, because the Oecd are the most industrial countries in the world, and politically they are more or less thinking in the same direction. So the problem was then when the draft document was there and the OECD governments asked the advisory bodies for advice, including the Civil Society Advisory Committee, which is called CSAC, then the civil society said, wait a minute, the principles are good with two exceptions. We do not like how you treat intellectual property in this document, and we do not like how you treat the role of the intermediaries. Intermediaries like ISPs should not be cyber police or cyber cops. They should be neutral, and intellectual property rights should be balanced. So they should take both sides into consideration. Free access to knowledge and legitimate protection of intellectual property. So the problem was then that the OECD governments were confronted with advice from a civil society group, and there was a disagreement. So finally the OECD decided to adopt the document and to ignore the civil society advice, which shows that how difficult it is, also for like-minded countries, to move forward if it comes to very concrete, real points. So that means all sides have to learn a lot. The article David Weitzner from the White House wrote that in the Washington Post, ignored the disagreement with the civil society, and immediately civil society protested and wrote an article in the New York Times and saying, what the guy from the White House is doing, they ignored our disagreement. And so now, because for the Western countries, I think the multi-stakeholder principle is important also to convince the rest of the world that it's the only way to move forward and to avoid governmental censorship and all the other things. But then they have to start at home and have to accept it. I think it's also for the Commissioner Cruz and for the European Union not so easy to understand fully what does it mean, multi-stakeholder participation of civil society groups. I think the Commission now tries to be more open. Last week there were consultations between the Commission and civil society in Brussels in preparation for the IGF. That means you see already so that a lot of things are moving forward, but it's still rather vague. A good example is the Council of Europe, because they have incorporated in the making of another document called Declaration on Internet Governance Principles from a very early stage, all stakeholders, and they adopted a document with 10 principles which are undisputable. So it's, I would not say like the Declaration of Human Rights, they have very general principles, but probably to have a certain level of generality if it comes to principles and to avoid specifics at this moment, I think is the only way to move forward. And this brings me to the final point now, when we discuss, is there a need for a constitution? With so many different activities, I think people now, I think from all sides of the spectrum, agree that to have some guidelines, to have some orientation is a good idea, to have something on paper. So I think nobody wants to have a hard law treaty, you know, which then needs ratification by national parliaments and which needs, you know, negotiations. In the Stockholm meeting, you know, I asked the guy from NATO, Timothy, about their negotiations with Russia and what is the position on the Cyber Security Convention, which Russia proposed in the first committee. And his answer was, okay, legally binding treaties will take 20 years to negotiate. So that means probably we can do something in the field of security which could be like confidence building measures. Or so that means, which is a little bit in the soft law arena. So otherwise, you know, it makes no sense to come with a hard law. And I think this is probably also for the general guidelines, the right recommendation, that we say, okay, if we could agree on very general principles where nobody can really disagree, like open internet, free internet, internet has to respect human rights, the end-to-end principle, the decentralized architecture, the multi-stakeholder governance principles. That means if you have just a set of principles, this would give you a certain orientation. If you go back to the Human Rights Declaration, so it's very simple principle, very difficult to disagree, and it was a non-binding document, the Declaration from 1948. It was not a legally binding document. It needed 18 years to have then the conventions, the legally binding conventions, and the legal binding conventions have a lot of procedures in it, which allow all types of also restrictions and other things. So I think this is where we are at the moment. We have a lot of activities in various intergovernmental bodies. We have a growing, you know, experience now with non-governmental bodies, with these two groups coming together and have to find a way, what I call a constructive cohabitation. And then, you know, the outcome could be that all this goes to something like, I have called this a framework of commitment, where governments, private sector groups like Google or Facebook, where technical community like ICANN, the IETF, where civil society organizations like Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International sign a document, which is then a non-binding document, and say, you know, we commit ourselves to these principles. So this would be a great innovation for international law, for international politics, how this could be done. I think the Internet Governance Forum offers such a platform to do this. So that means probably the Internet Governance Forum is free to establish like a constitutional committee with representatives from all stakeholders, and they say, okay, here we have already the OECD principles, we have the Council of Europe principles, we have the various proposals from various governments, we have this and this, the ICANN statutes and things like that. Now let's try to maneuver in a certain way that probably in the year 2015, when the IGF celebrates its 10th anniversary, we could have something like a constitution. Interestingly, the Brazilian government, and Brazil is meanwhile an important player, and the guy in the foreign ministry, Mr. Romulo, you know, has discovered this as an issue, and together with India and South Africa and the so-called IPSA group, he is trying now to make this a subject in the next IGF in Baku, in the session looking forward. So that means it remains on the agenda. That, as I said, the interest of all stakeholders is here to bring more stability to the process, to more clarity. But if you go directly to legally binding instruments, then probably you will fail. The only way is to have this in a non-binding form, But then you need the inclusion of all stakeholders. And it's interesting to see if you ask questions to private corporations like Cisco, Facebook, Microsoft, Google, would you sign such a document? Would you commit yourself to respect human rights, to respect say, the open nature of the internet, the free internet? Then certainly the answer is, in principle, yes. But what does it mean in principle? So that means it has to be tested out. So really all stakeholders have the same interest and the same wish to commit themselves to such principles. But if we reach this, then really the multi-stakeholder governance model has proof that this is the innovation of the 21st century for a new type of policy. I have some more slides, but I think I stop here and we have then more time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have some time for discussion now. If you wish to ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand and wait for the mic for the benefit of the remote participants. Okay, who has the first question? It seems that I will. Okay, in that case. Okay, that's the first question.
Excuse me, my name is Vesa Miettinen.
Mike.
Yes, thank you.
Excuse me, my name is Vesa Miettinen and I'm from Association of IT Sector Employees. Normally I'm not using first question, but I have exception now. So I would like to ask, what is the situation for internet society future, and what kind of opportunity we have shared in the information based on our growth for internet security? Thank you in advance.
So you mean the Internet Society, the organization ISOC, or Internet Society as a society as a whole?
In general way, indeed. In general, question according to future for internet society and growth that we have able to share information in the future, if you understand.
Okay, I hope I got it right. Like always, you can have an optimistic and a pessimistic scenario. The optimistic scenario is the internet remains as it is, open and free, global, and we grow from 2 billion to 4 billion to 6 billion to 7 billion users, so that everybody is involved. And I think there's a real chance that we can have this, and we will see more and more and more application. 15 years ago there was no Google, 10 years ago there was no Facebook, 5 years ago we had only little experience with the cloud. And so it means what will it be in 5, 10, 15 years from now. So it means our life will be richer, which will include also other problems now that everybody is sitting in his own bubble. That means has to, you have seen the nice book, The Filter Bubble, that a lot of risks are involved if we are, let's say, going forward to bring the internet to all aspects of our life, probably in the form of RFID chips, to our jackets, to our shoes, probably even to our body. So that means these are a lot of things in it, but this is the optimistic scenario. We are moving forward. We will have more people, more application, more opportunities, which will bring more risks and threats, and we manage this. The more pessimistic scenario is that for very narrow-minded political and commercial reasons, we try to squeeze the internet as it is today in spaces which can be easier politically controlled or commercially controlled. I think what the music or the content industry in generally wants to have is they want to have money. If they can cash money better on a national basis, where they have experienced billing mechanisms, and they have then to deal with national jurisdictions. In various countries they have different jurisdictions. So for them, a renationalized internet is not such a bad idea. So this will bring down a lot of what they call illegal copying or things like that. So, and also, And the same argument can be used certainly by political groups who would say, okay, we hate this global internet and we want to control it. So that means for commercial and political reasons, the open and free internet could be damaged. I do not believe that this will be destroyed, because you have always opportunities to bypass, to tunnel it, you know, to bridge it or whatever. So that means the technology also enables people to fire back if control goes too far. But it's rather difficult, and if you look in China, with all the opportunities you have to tunnel and to bypass and to do things, life is much more risky. If you do something which goes against the local rules, then it's on other places. So in the past we said, okay, a pessimist is a well-informed optimist. So that I do not hope that this is true, so I'm more optimistic than pessimistic.
Yes, I appreciate that your answer, and I see that we have great future. And until 2015, I see lots of opportunities to grow in our e-business, and according to our public transportation system here in Helsinki, there will be a great future. Thank you for coming to Helsinki. See you in the future.
Thank you very much for your question.
Yes, I'm Anne Ahnen from the Ministry for Foreign Affairs. You mentioned in the beginning of your excellent presentation also WTO and services. Would you a little bit comment on how do you see, would WTO have more role in the future discussions? It wasn't so much mentioned in your presentation. Thank you.
That's true. I think WTO and WIPO have collaborated over the years in the protection of intellectual property and trade-related aspects like the TRIPS agreement. So, and this will continue to play a role, and internet is, you know, sometimes, you know, a very controversial issue. I don't know whether you are aware, in the case United States versus Antigua on this in WTO, where Antigua offers online game playing services, which are not allowed in the United States, for instance in California. And so the United States has tried to stop Antigua offering this online service, and Antigua went to the WTO and they created a panel, and 3 times Antigua won, but the United States government is not yet happy with the decision and tries to continue to block it. So that means sometimes, you know, we talk about dual-use technology, so that technology can be used for good and bad things. And we have also dual-use policies, that some countries are fighting for freedom on the one hand, but it goes in the wrong direction. They have a different approach. Anyhow, so the WTO plays a role. But more important in my eyes is that a number of governments active in the WTO and also in WIPO decided to single out a number of issues and drafted the ACTA agreement. And this is now a big issue. It's not directly a WTO issue, but it was more or less inspired by negotiations in the WTO. And the direction you see now is the ACTA treaty. The 10,000 people on the streets and who don't want to have it is a very good example that this single leadership is, of one stakeholder doesn't work anymore. So that means if you see the criteria for a multi-stakeholder policy process, open, transparent, bottom-up, so the contrary was done in ACTA. It was secret, it was closed, it was top-down, it was only governments, you know, with some industry behind it. And so, and the result is now that people are not ready to accept anymore such both the procedure, how it was done, and content. So the problem with the ACTA treaty is that I think nobody would say any serious things against the first 2 parts if it comes to this product piracy and the pharmaceutical issues. You could have different opinions about the pharmaceutical part. So, but what makes people furious is that this intellectual property part follows more or less what France has regulated in its Adobe law, so that will open the door. It says not directly, but it opens the door for the 3-strike response, so that you are cut off the internet or whatever. That means if a teenage girl just, you know, sings a song which is copyrighted and puts this as a YouTube, then video uploads it, and then, you know, it's violates already copyright, because she had no right to sing the song and to upload it, because she had to ask the composer whether this is allowed to sing the song and to make a video out of it. She can sing it at home. But it means here we have some regulation which are really, you know, need more input for more stakeholders to come with rational solutions. And the WTO and other intergovernmental organizations would be well advised to open their doors more to non-governmental stakeholders. So the ITU has private sector member, but does not like civil society in it. The OECD has given a good example, but as I explained, you know, it's only the first step. But it would be good if the WTO would have more multi-stakeholder roundtables before they come to decision making.
Yeah, I'm Jos Helmich. I'm just an interested member of it. I was wondering, what if we blow up the internet? We have smart grids which are streaming huge streams of data. We have an EU library to which all content is submitted. Can we get rid then of all the problems with ACTA and all the problems with political rights and things like that? Is such a centralized internet possible? What do you think?
I think if you go back to the reason why we have the internet, the reason why we have the internet was that the American military was afraid that if they continue with a centralized command and communication system, they would create this single point of failure in the case of a nuclear war with the Russians. The Russians would attack the communication system, and with one hit of the Russian rocket, then communication would be down. So the idea in the 60s, which was discussed in the RAND Corporation to survive a nuclear attack from the Russians, was to have a decentralized systems where you have more nodes than the Russians' rockets, so that you could survive any attack. So that means decentralization as an instrument to that becomes undestroyable. So, and more or less this is what we have today. It's even more decentralized. So that means to ruin the internet, you know, with one attack is absolutely impossible. You can create a lot of harm. You can have denial of service attacks on certain servers. You can bring down the quality of service. You know, you can send viruses. You can do a lot of stupid things which creates a lot of harm to people. But you cannot destroy the internet as such. So I think this is undestroyable. The other question is, what we see now is that within the internet is based on the end-to-end principle. All the intelligence is on the end, and in the center there's just some servers who just take packages from A to B and send it then to the edges. All the intelligence is on the edges. But what happens now on the edges is that we see the emergence of bubbles where, for instance, Facebook is a good example, is on top of a domain, facebook.com. It's just a domain name. So, and now we have 750 million in this domain. And within this domain, the owner of this domain has certainly the right to set rules. And if you join Facebook, if you go into this domain, then you have to follow the rules. You accept, and then you have to follow the rules. And these rules are set just by one man, by Mark Zuckerberg, probably on the basis of some advice. So it means there's no real democracy in Facebook. So it's just the dictatorship of one person who more or less regulates the social life of 700 million people in the world. So this is on top of the internet. So, and the question is, we will see more and more bubbles at the edge of the internet which have their internal rules. Apple is a similar thing. That means you cannot do what you want with Apple. So that means you have to ask for permission if you want that, and things like that. So this is what we could probably see, that voluntarily people go into such a bubble and then accept rules, and then they lose their a certain part of their identity or their own self-determination. It means if you do not use your email anymore, if you could do everything via Facebook, then you lose control over your private communication. Probably would say it's not a problem for me, I just write nonsense in my emails and everybody can read it. So it's fine, but a lot of other people will have probably some concerns. So that means to move forward, to have a more complex system does not mean everything gets better. But it means we have a lot of new risks, a lot of new challenges, which has to be settled. And insofar, the emergence of more and more of such bubbles, which have their internal rules, I think is probably one trend. A lot of people say nobody will remember anymore, the internet as it was 20 years ago, because the bubbles are much bigger than what the internet was 20 years ago as a core element. So the internet infrastructure will not disappear because you need this, but it could be that all these applications are becoming more important than the internet as such. This is one option.
Okay, we have no more time for questions now. I have one more request from the floor, but I have been told that it's a short announcement. So the next speaker can come and set his slides up while the announcement is being told to us, and then we just move forward. The next English intervention is going to be at 1 o'clock p.m. Finnish time, which is 10 UTC. Okay, please.
Yes, I am Kleinwächter, emeritus professor from the University of Tampere, and I would just like to tell that Professor Kleinwächter is not only from the University of Århusin, but he has also a docentship, adjunct professorship at the University of Tampere. He first came to as a visiting professor for a year, 20 years ago exactly, in 1992 to Tampere, and since that he has been regularly teaching international communication and during the past 5 years internet governance course. This afternoon at 1 o'clock he starts another 20-hour package of lectures in Tampere for our graduate students on that topic. So he is a permanent connection to Finland, especially to the University of Tampere. And part of that lecture course is also a little 3-hour seminar where Surya Lanskura and Jonne Soininen are joining Kleinwächter to tell about the internet governance connections in practice. So we are happy to have such a distinguished first-hand actor from the internet governance mafia as part of the Finnish academic mafia. Thank you.
Thank you for the flowers.
Kiitoksia. Nyt palaamme suomen kieleen ohjelmassa. Seuraavana puheena Kari Viiruman Icom ry:stä puhuu meille internetin roolista yhteiskunnan kriiseissä.